Hi and welcome everybody to another piano video here on Merriam Pianos on YouTube. My name is Stu Harrison and we are continuing our series of piano making regions of the world. Today we're going to talk about North America and the American piano industry through the 18 and 1900s. So thank you so much for joining us for today's video. If it's the first time that you are joining us here on YouTube, we would love for you to hit that subscribe and the notification bell so that you know every time we come out with a new video. We're always coming out with new videos, at least one or two per week. And we would love to see you there commenting, participating, and just enjoying the content. So without further ado, let's dive right in with today's video on the United States and the piano. The story of piano making in America, to me, is a really fascinating one because it mirrors so many other industries that have an American story to them. It follows a climactic boom-bust cycle and these huge waves of innovation that follow just gigantic expansions of the category, followed in a lot of cases by contractions and consolidations in the industry. American business has never really been about the slow, smooth, and steady route. It follows, public fascination. It follows investor appetites. It follows aggressive, creative innovation. It's really quite a unique environment in which you see businesses flourish, grow, die. And as I said, the piano business is really no exception to that. Piano making in the United States goes back just as early as piano making in Europe. The first instance of a piano being built in the United States is all the way back in 1775, but things really got started in the early 1800s, approximately the same time that a lot of venerable German brands that we know of were also getting their foothold over on the east side of the Atlantic. And there's no more influential figure in American piano building when you really get down to the root of it than Jonas Chickering. Some of you may have been expecting me to name one of the Steinway brothers, but really it's Chickering all the way back in the early 1800s that not only created a lot of the technical foundation for where the piano would head, but also started to infuse the instrument in the popular imagination of the American public. Chickering was responsible for the introduction of the single-member iron plate into a piano. He was responsible for the introduction of the concept of overstringing, deflection of the strings. There's a number of foundational innovations that took the piano in a very distinctive modern direction. That were those not in place, Steinway, that really then became the late 1800s innovator of note, would not have been able to achieve. But it really was Jonas Chickering's innovations of the early 1800s which laid the groundwork for Steinway's later success and their successive patents and really pushing forward of the design of the modern piano. Pianos in the United States became immensely popular in the late 1800s. To the point where this really was the central object in which many families aspired to have in their home. Much like today, we've got big screen TVs and computers. The piano was really the congregating point under which or around which many American families either participated in or certainly aspired to have. Truly the peak of American piano building has to have been right in the 1910 range, where over 365,000 pianos were being made annually, which was more than half of the entire world's production of the instruments. And close to 300 piano manufacturers at that time were outputting that. You still had a progressive sense of design and quality that continues to rise right through the 1920s. This, of course, is often referred to as the golden age of American piano building, with the major piano building centers on the East Coast and East Central areas of the United States, Cincinnati, Boston, of course, being the home to Chickering, New York being the home to Steinway, and then numerous other lower and mid-tier brands, which in a lot of cases were only in existence for 20 or 30 years, just to capture this really big bubble. Another huge feature of American piano making at this time was the introduction and the inclusion of player mechanisms and reproducing piano mechanisms into the industry. We often think of disc leviers and piano disc and QRS and all of these things being relatively modern additions to the piano purchasing. And we all know for sure that the United States is the largest buyer per capita of these types of systems in the modern day. But this goes back 100 years. Americans were completely fascinated by the concept of player pianos, and for those who could afford it, the ultra expensive reproducing pianos of the age, in some cases going for 4 times the value of the instrument itself. This also really peaked in the late 1920s as the sort of the boom economic cycle really came crashing down. As the average size of a home moving into the 1930s dramatically shrunk, so did the pianos that were being built to accommodate them. And you had this huge shift from large, ornate, upright and grand pianos and square grand pianos, mostly at that time, into something that was far smaller. We would come to know it as the spinet. And so there was this gigantic shift away from both quality as well as luxury into something that was a far more commodified product. And this also led to a huge contraction and consolidation in the industry. You had brands like Knabe, Chickering, Wurlitzer, all really consolidating down into both the Aeolian as well as the American Piano Company, which would further down the road consolidate into a single entity, leaving really just brands such as Steinway and Charles Walter and Baldwin, the only 3 brands that never got swallowed up by those amalgamations. Throughout this entire period of time, you have this slow ski hill down in terms of demand for the quantity of acoustic pianos in the United States. Now, during World War II, all piano making pretty well stopped. A lot of those factories that were able to manipulate and work with wood and machinery and could be retooled for the war effort were pretty well mandated to do so. And if they weren't, materials weren't available anyway. So the whole industry essentially came to a grinding halt for about half a decade. Coming into the 1950s, we have another small boom in the interest in pianos, and American culture generally has a nice little renaissance coming out of World War II. There's an expansion of buying power for middle-class Americans, and this kind of continues in a slight upward trend through into about the mid-1970s. And then, of course, you have an additional and new decline. This brought on the era of really poor quality control that took Steinway many years and is still in some cases trying to claw its way back from. It took Baldwin into a crazy direction where suddenly Baldwin was into the finance world. It was into a number of other areas where it didn't have any competency, and the piano itself was largely ignored along with the quality. The timing of this was awful because this coincided with the introduction of the Japanese essentially invasion of the market by Kawai and Yamaha, where the pianos were of exceptionally high quality control, and the price point was coming in very similar to the most basic American models. So you had this perfect storm that really gobbled up and unfortunately spat out what was left of a vibrant American piano manufacturing core, leaving really just Steinway and a very small number of, let's call them boutique makers, in the form of Charles Walter and Mason and Hamlin, which was bought up subsequently from its ashes by the piano disc company and the Breguet brothers. Manufacturers north of the border in Canada weren't spared any different a fate. You can see the Heinzmann sign just over my right shoulder there. That's actually an original Heinzmann factory door sign from their downtown factory, turn of the century. And they also suffered from the same amount of consolidation and driving quality down and really not focusing on sort of a long-term strategy. It really was about survival, and it was a downward spiral, trying to cut costs and keep numbers high, and it just didn't work. It didn't work for Lesage or Mason and Riche. It certainly didn't work for Heinzmann, and so all of these old giants really just kind of crumbled away. A lot of people make comparisons to the American automotive industry with the piano industry, and I think the comparisons are apt. You had a lot of the same dynamics taking place. You had this concept that you had an insulated market with a public that would tolerate very poor quality. And that certainly just crashed into a quickly globalizing world or economy where you had outside quality come in and just totally pop that mythology. You had corporate interests that had simply lost interest or the ability to innovate at the same level that they were coming out of post-World War II, or certainly at the turn of the century. And finally, when you look at real purchasing power, you really had a peak in the American middle class around the mid-1970s, after which there is this hard conservative shift in political thought away from liberalism, which truly dominated American politics really from about the Great Depression and FDR right through until about Reagan. And that really did tip the balance of wealth back in the direction of corporate America and took a lot of the disposable income out of middle-class Americans. American pianos today, I would say, have slowly started to find their footing again. It will be very interesting to see what happens to the American industry moving forward. It is such a speck of what it used to be. The whole continent produces less than 5,000 pianos per year amongst all of its producers. And just recently, Steinway has announced its intention to list itself as a public company. Will be interesting to see where that goes, because of course a quarterly profit report to an investor isn't necessarily always going to be aligned with the long-term quality and development of instruments, which always have been more of a passion project than anything else. However, the instruments have certainly returned to a quality that is on par with mid-range Western European instruments and the very best out of Japan. When you look back at over 2 centuries of American piano making, it's very easy to feel quite tragic about the entire thing and write piano off as a dying hobby or pastime itself. However, there are major reasons for optimism. The number of actual piano instruments sold in the United States continues to rise every year, even though that has increasingly become dominated by digital pianos. Additionally, the number of instruments changing hands in the second-hand market is estimated to be close to 1 million instruments per year. So far from a lack of interest in the instrument itself, it's really just a disconnection of the American industry versus what the American public was really truly interested in. Now, the instruments themselves have several reputational points which I believe are accurate. American pianos are often described as being very powerful. They're often described as being very, very mid-rangey. And just as other instruments from around the world draw a lot of their ingredients and inspirations from their surroundings, American pianos, one of the big hallmarks is the addition or the use of hard rock maple in its rims, and the goal of creating as much projection and as much power out of the instrument as humanly possible. The use of the hard rock maple also gave it a fairly distinctive mid-range tonality. Each type of wood does lend a certain character to the tone of the instrument. And then the fact that the United States has such a diverse climate also led to the focus on construction techniques that would ensure high levels of stability. And in doing so, it also really ensured a high level of cabinet activation and resonance for a lot of these instruments, at least at the concert quality. Many of those design traits really floated back over to Germany and have been since adopted by the vast majority of Western European high-quality instruments, to the point where all of the new instruments coming from C. Bechstein at a concert level or Fazioli or Hamburg Steinway are really just advancements and tweaks on what came out of the United States in the late 1800s and early 1900s. So you have this very interesting cross-exchange across the Atlantic between these two piano-producing regions of the world. Having said that, as I've mentioned in the German video in this series, I really do believe that Germany, over the course of the last 150 years, has done the best job of maintaining a core of skilled laborers that are just baked in the traditions of piano building. So even though the United States and Germany has traded places in terms of who's really been the leader in piano construction over that time, you have much less of a oscillation of quality and of focus and of industry size in Western Germany than you have seen in the United States. I hope you've enjoyed this short discussion and exploration of the American history of piano making. I've certainly enjoyed putting it together and sharing it with you. And if you want to see more, please do subscribe and hit that notification bell. Would love to have you back for more videos, not just on discussions like this, but full instrument reviews, both digital and acoustic, some playing tips, and really everything related to pianos. My name is Stu Harrison. This has been Merriam Pianos on YouTube, and I hope you have a great day.